Hi, I'm Shepherd Hoodwin. I channel the Michael entity. I channel soul profiles, as well as doing intuitive readings, past life therapy, and teaching others how to channel.
What is the soul?
The soul is the animating force in all living things. You might think of reality as having two parts to it. One part is source, and the other part is creation. And in everything in creation, there's some source. And so the soul helps convey what is in source into the world of creation.
Is a soul born? Does a soul die?
I think of the core of ourselves as being a spark of the Tao or a unit of consciousness in all that is. When we, as Source, decide that we want to experience a planet and be a human being in this particular instance, we need a soul as our vehicle to allow us to anchor into the dimensional universe. And so Source creates a soul, and then we have experiences on the physical plane of that planet many lifetimes as a human being. Then, when we're done with the physical plane, we as soul ascend through all the higher planes of that planet until we're reabsorbed back into the Tao. At that point, the soul is no longer needed for that particular function, but becomes integrated into Source, having enriched it through all of its experiences.
What's the difference between a young soul and an old soul?
When the Source creates a new soul, it's completely without experience. It's parallel to the way that a newborn baby is completely without experience, no matter how much experience it had in previous lifetimes. That human body and personality are brand new. And so it goes through a series of developmental experiences. We all do this. We all move from being a newborn, infant, baby, youngster, teenager, etc. And as we move through these stages, we develop more experiences, we gain more mastery of what it is to be a human being, especially if we're paying attention. The same thing happens with the soul. So, a brand new soul, even though it may have a lot of experience behind it as a spark of the Tao or a unit of consciousness in the all that is, in this series of lifetimes on this planet, it's new. So, it has to get its feet wet. So the first lifetimes are usually pretty easy, maybe what we would consider to be paradise, where it has very simple lifetimes getting acquainted with what Earth is like, what do you need to do to survive on Earth, how do you feed yourself, and just having a lot of fun. And then it moves along and it becomes bored with that and starts to create uh, larger communities, and working within a larger community becomes interesting. So that's another stage in its development. And then once it feels like, okay, I've really got it, I've got this planet, I understand it, then the soul is thinking, how can I really master the outer world? How can I be as successful as I can be in the outer world? And so this is the cycle we call the young soul cycle. And this is often populated by people who are highly motivated to find material success. Once the soul feels confident about all these outer world skills, then it starts to become more interested in the inner world. For example, emotions, relationships. How can I go deeper into self? How can I create great works of art? How can I create community where we all help each other? And so this is a big change for the soul. This is what we call in the Michael teachings the mature soul cycle. And after the soul now has gone as deep as possible into self, then it starts to explore the larger context. It becomes more philosophical. It's interested in, okay, there's you and me, but there's also you and me and all these other people and the whole universe. So that's called the old soul cycle. Once the soul is satisfied that it has a really good sense of that, it may say, okay, I think I'm done with this physical plane school, and it moves on full time to the next school, which we call the astral plane. There are 7 planes of creation altogether.
What is the soul's relation to Source/God?
Well, Source creates souls to expand its experience of love, to learn more about what it is. That's the whole purpose of creation. So, souls are having experiences. Every soul is unique. And the uniqueness of the soul is what allows Source to have a wide variety of experiences. And Source is always observing through that. Let's say that you're Source and you are complete and wonderful, everything's great, except now you're starting to get a little bored being perfect with nothing new coming in, no new information. And so you think, you know what, I think I'll create a new universe and send some pieces of myself out into that universe to have more experiences so I can explore who I am more. I can explore what love is, what truth is, what beauty is, what all these marvelous qualities are. And so let's create some new life forms, some new types of planets with different types of challenges. And to do that, I'm going to create some souls. Oh, look at that planet that I created over here, Earth. Isn't it beautiful? Let's create some sentient souls out of these human creatures that I created, and let's see what they do with it. So the souls start inhabiting the human form and start to have some interesting new experiences. And Source is really pretty tickled with that because it's getting some new insight into what it is, and it's actually expanding itself through all these new experiences.
Mind, body, or soul? Which is the real us?
I love this question because when you first start out on a spiritual path, you'll probably be told, truthfully, you're not just your body, you're not just your mind, you're your soul. You need to identify with that. But I think a problem that arises is that people then start to deny their body. And if you look at most religions and spiritual teachings, there's a lot of denial of the body. So I think we get the best results if we say, I am all of this. I take full ownership of my body, I take full ownership of my mind, but I also know that I'm far more than that, that I'm a vast eternal soul who has lived many lifetimes, and I'm currently inhabiting this body. I love my mind, and I take responsibility for it.
Are human incarnations voluntarily chosen?
Yes, in fact, choice is a fundamental concept of this universe. For sentient beings like humans, we choose almost everything. Of course, other people are making choices that affect us, but mainly we choose everything. So, yes, we choose our incarnations. Some people who have a victim mentality believe that they didn't choose to be born, they were forced into it by some malevolent forces. That is not the case. On some level, we all chose to be here. We chose our parents. We chose our basic circumstances. Of course, other people are choosing maybe to do some things to us that we didn't choose, but we chose the basic situation and we knew for the most part what we were getting into.
What's the purpose of life on the physical plane?
Well, believe it or not, souls think that being a human on the physical plane is very interesting. And maybe they sometimes forget how hard it can be. But it's sort of like the same reason that an athlete might choose to climb a mountain. You might say, are they out of their minds? That's so hard. Why would you climb a mountain? But they find it exhilarating. They like to challenge themselves. In fact, all sports could be described that way. It's the exhilaration of the challenge. Or you might say, why do kids spend all these hours playing video games when you're constantly being challenged and someone might knock out your character and then you're dead and you can lose and all of that. But they find it exciting, they find it exhilarating. So I think it's the same really for us as souls. We thought it would be very interesting. Now, I'm not minimizing how painful and difficult it can be to be human, especially right now. This is a very difficult time to be incarnate on the physical plane of Earth. But there's also a lot of rewards from it. And the bottom line is is that through these challenges we grow. We expand our consciousness of love. We learn more about what love is. And love moves from being a more unconscious concept to something that we really know in our guts, you might say.
Does the soul plan its incarnations ahead of time?
Yes, most souls do plan their upcoming lifetimes to varying degrees. If you're a younger soul, it's sort of like going on a scavenger hunt. You haven't checked many things off your list, and so just about any experience will look interesting. So you may not be so fussy, and if your guides come to you and say, "Oh, here's an opening for a body, your father will be a drug lord," and be very brutal and vicious. And you might say, "Oh, great, that sounds really interesting. I think I'd like to have that experience." But after you've checked a number of things off your scavenger hunt list, you become more selective, and that means you have to plan your lifetime in more detail. You say, "Okay, I need this experience. I really want to test my ability to endure pain, or I want to have a really creative, artistic lifetime." And so it's going to take more planning to choose the right parents and body and environment to incarnate into. You may need to make more agreements with other souls to set up the things that you specifically want. But I'd say most souls come in with some kind of a plan, maybe rough or maybe very detailed.
Many people experience challenges while living in a body. Does the soul seek such challenges? And if so, why?
Some of the challenges we face are indeed part of our life plan, and some of them are just hazards of the physical plane. It's hard to be here. Bodies get sick, they have accidents, there are genetic issues. A lot of people are not very nice or well behaved and do bad things. So we do know coming in that this is not an easy planet and that we're going to encounter some challenges. That said, some of the challenges we encounter, we do know about ahead of time. For example, if you created a karmic ribbon in a past life, let's say you murdered someone in cold blood, and you feel that karma weighing on you, you might actually plan a life and say, okay, I'm going to repay that karma. There are two ways you might do that. You might save the person's life, or you might let them take your life. And obviously, the first way is nicer. But in any case, sometimes we do plan lifetimes to take care of some old business like that. You might have maybe mistreated handicapped people, and your guide said to you, it might be a really good idea if you could walk a mile in their shoes for a lifetime. And you agreed with them. You thought, okay, all right, I'll take on a handicapped lifetime. And in fact, virtually every soul will have a handicapped lifetime. Virtually every soul will be homosexual, bisexual, asexual, all the different things, because it's an interesting planet and it's part of the curriculum. You don't want to miss some of these foundational human experiences. You may therefore be in a situation where you are the victim of prejudice, bigotry, maybe even genocide because of the color of your skin or your sexuality. So this is all part of the curriculum, and we know this coming in. Obviously, as eternal souls, there is no lasting harm that comes to any of this, but there could be some trauma that we then will choose to work out in other lifetimes. But all of it's good in a sense because we're learning lessons. We're learning how it feels for other people. We're gaining more compassion.
Do we have soul groups that we incarnate with across different lifetimes?
Yes, we definitely do. We're each a part of a soul family of roughly 1,000 souls. And then the soul families are also part of a group of 7 soul families called a cadre in the Michael teachings, and that's a part of a still larger group. A lot of our life experiences are with fellow members of our soul groups. And that's because we're working on things together and we're friends and we've done a lot of things together already. And so these are people that maybe feel instantly familiar when we meet them, and usually we get along pretty well with them. And so, yes, we usually find members of our soul family here on the physical plane. There's some suggestion in metaphysical literature that people who do terrible things to us or commit mass genocide or whatever are really just wonderful, sweet souls who have selflessly volunteered to do these terrible things to give us lessons. I don't buy that. I don't think that's the case at all. I think they have severe issues, and sometimes we say, okay, well, maybe I'll sign up to hang out with that person and I'll learn some things from it. But I don't think that these people are doing us favors. I think they're very troubled, messed up souls, because otherwise you couldn't bear to do terrible things to other human beings. If you're already a really loving, evolved soul, you just wouldn't do that. But all things can be used for our growth. So let's say you are in a place where there's a genocidal leader or torturers or whatever, and you get swept up in that, you say, okay, well, this is a good opportunity for me to test my ability to stay in unconditional love, for example. So if you know that's coming and you think that that would be valuable for your growth, then you might sign up for it. And you may not know it's coming because not everything is known ahead of time. You generally know it's going to happen in the first few years of your life because that's imminent. I mean, if a parent is already dying about the time you're born, you know you're signing up for that. But you don't know for sure that 40 years after you're born, a genocidal leader will come to power in your country. And then you're confronted with some choices. What am I going to do about this? Am I going to leave? Am I going to stay? Am I going to try to change things here? So it's hard. It really pressures you to think clearly about the choices that you're making. I think a lot of people, when Hitler came to power, really felt like, I need to get out of here. But then they thought, well, but my business is here, my family is here, it's too much trouble. They talked themselves out of their intuition, so that was their lesson. Listen to your intuition.
Do we choose our parents or other family members ahead of time?
We choose one parent. Often we make an agreement with another soul to be our parent before the parent has even incarnated, because these time frames can get stretched out between lives. And so let's say I've made an agreement with another soul to be my mother because she's coming in as a female. Then that mother has 20, 30, 40 years to choose a mate, and that's her choice. That's not my choice. So if I then decide to follow through on that agreement to be born to that mother, then I have to accept as part of the package deal who the father is and who the other siblings are. So let's say the father made an agreement with another soul, and that soul was born first. So then that soul, let's say, is going to be my brother. So at the time that the mother is pregnant with the second child, and that's my opportunity to come in, I can still back out. I can still say, okay, you know what? That body isn't looking like what I had wanted for this lifetime. I'm not sure I want a lifetime with that father and that brother. Meanwhile, I've probably made some tentative agreements with some other souls. So maybe I'll go with plan B or plan C. Also, then the mother probably had some other agreements with other souls. So she may go to soul number 2 and say, okay, this soul friend backed out. Do you want the body? And they'll say yes or no. So these things are always getting juggled at the last minute. And then it really isn't till the first breath after birth that the incoming soul usually makes a permanent link with that body. That's called incarnation. So things can really change up to the moment of birth to just what soul it's going to be, although generally it doesn't. Generally, even around conception, the parents may have a sense of the soul that really wants to come in, and that may remain constant. But things aren't set in stone, so we always have the opportunity to choose.
Are there contracts or agreements between souls?
Yes, the contracts or agreements are an intrinsic part of every life plan. So let's say I choose a life task, sort of like if you're doing a PhD thesis, what you decide the theme of it's going to be, what you want to explore. It's in general terms. So once you've decided what your life task is, like I really want to explore how to stick with something and bring it to fruition and not keep backing out. That's my life task. That's what I've chosen. Nobody inflicted that on me. But I've come to understand that I need some work here. So then I'm going to go to my various soul friends who I know who are also going to be born around the same time in the same place, and I make agreements with them. I say, could you be the friend who keeps reminding me that I need to finish things? And would you be the friend who helps me to really think through my choices and not be so impulsive as like I always was before, etc. So we come in with a lot of soul agreements, and there's no ironclad obligation to keep those agreements, but we tend to keep those agreements because these are our soul friends, and we want to help them and they want to help us. And so, yes, some souls will back out of their agreements because their situation changed, but a lot of people will follow through and will keep their agreements with us and we'll keep our agreements with them.
Do spirit guides or angels assist us?
Absolutely, yes. We have both spirit guides and angels. I think of angels as the full-time behind-the-scenes staff. If you agree with Shakespeare that all the world is a stage, then you might think of the angels as the union employees who run the follow spots and the ushers and make the curtains go up and down. So they're full-time. And they are beautiful beings who have generally not incarnated on the physical plane, so they have the kind of innocence about them that we associate with angels. So that's a pretty accurate characterization. And then the spirit guides are basically you and me when we're not here on the physical plane having lives. These are our soul friends who are between lives. They know our life plan and our life task really well, and they try to keep us on our plan. They're the ones whispering in our ears, and we may think it's just our own thoughts, but they're whispering, saying, oh, don't forget, you're supposed to meet this guy here. Come on, let's go there. So they guide us. They literally guide us. Now, a lot of people ignore their inner guidance. Even if they think it's their own conscience speaking, a lot of people ignore that. So many of our guides and angels feel underemployed. They're just not getting to do much because their people aren't listening to them. But there's always at least one guide for every person that's available. And if the person opens up to that guidance, it's there. Well, another way that our guides get through to us is through other people. So let's say you're not listening to your guides at the moment, but maybe your friends is, and your friends hear this loud and clear message, and they come to you and they say, you are screwing up here. You better stop this. So that could be another way that the guides work with us. Also, signs, like I'm always seeing 11:11 on the clock, and that's a reminder of transformation. People often get signs from their loved ones from the other side, like maybe a certain type of bird means something to you, so they can arrange so that bird shows up to remind you of messages. The spirit world is very much involved in our day-to-day lives if we have the eyes to see it.
What is the veil of forgetting and why do we need it?
Actually, very young children tend to remember a lot. You'll hear so many stories about children just learning to talk who will say things like, Mommy, do you remember when I was big and you were little? Or do you remember when I was your grandma? Things like that. In India and places that believe in reincarnation, that will be encouraged. They'll say, oh, really? Tell me about it. In the United States and our more Western cultures, the reaction tends to be, oh, you have such a good imagination, and they dismiss it. So there's an encouragement to forget. But in any case, we live in pretty dense bodies here. And when babies are first born, they're really kind of half still in the spirit world. They're not fully in the body. But in the first 7 years of life, we get more and more anchored in this heavy body, and just being in a heavy body helps us forget. And also, It's valuable to focus on the life that's being lived. So you might start to forget about some of the spirit world things because you're learning your ABCs or whatever. And it's hard to hold all of that in your mind at the same time. It's true that if we came in remembering everything we knew before incarnating, it would be easier in some ways. We'd remember that we're eternal souls, and that could be really great. But even if we did remember, oh, I'm an eternal soul, living that in a human body with the planet the way that it is still isn't so easy. So I can have a theory like, oh, everything is love, love is the reality. But then I'm in a human body and I'm hit by a truck and I'm in a lot of pain. It might be hard for me to remember that, oh, yeah, I'm an eternal soul and love is everything because I'm in a body and it hurts. And so being able to hold on to that consciousness would not be so easy, even if I did not forget. But there are some advantages to forgetting. So, for example, let's say I was Mozart in my last life and I had all of these incredible skills. I may just, want to keep doing that in every lifetime because it's really easy for me. But if I forget, I might get interested in learning some new things. Like, for example, I might want to become an engineer. And you can imagine that the soul, who was also Mozart, could be an incredible engineer, but he might not choose to do that if it were really easy for him to keep doing what he was always already doing.
Discuss the role of free will in a given incarnation.
The soul planned a life, and the soul's job is to plan the big things about the life. Like, this is what the lifetime is about. But the soul does not micromanage. The soul is not concerned about what you're having for dinner or whether you buy the blue dress or the green dress. The soul is really concerned with having some particular accomplishments in that lifetime that relate to lessons, growth, creativity, and so forth. So the soul is not going to be whispering in your ear all the time, unless you ask it to, I suppose, um, about all the little things of life. Those are more in the domain of the personality. This is what we get to choose. But when we choose in a pig-headed, egotistical way, that denies the soul plan, we're only asking for trouble. It's going to create misery for us because the soul set up the life to flow in a certain way. And if you're doing stuff that your ego is telling you to do, that's false personality, the fear-based self, then you're not going to be getting as much support from spirit, and things are not likely to go as well. So listen to the inner promptings when it comes to the big things, the really most significant choices in life. But for the little things, just try to choose as wisely as you can based on what you know, what you feel, how you read things, and so forth.
Is life on the physical plane an illusion?
I love that question because you do hear that a lot. And it's the whole kind of matrix sort of thing about, oh, we're all being manipulated. But in a sense, it is an illusion because the Tao, the source, is the reality, and everything is consciousness. Everything is a creation of the mind of God. So if you look at an atom, science will tell us that that atom is mostly space. There's really not much there except space and energy. It's really just thought. So if the physical plane is an illusion, the whole universe is an illusion, but it's a very useful illusion. And from our point of view, it's a pretty solid one. So even if we can say, well, that wall over there is an illusion, we probably don't want to walk into it because we're going to hurt if we do that. So, yeah, in a sense, it's an illusion, but it's also real. It's one of those divine paradoxes. It's real, it's not real, it's useful. So, the divine paradox here is that what we do matters because it's a chance to grow in our ability to know love. So, every choice matters, but then from this bigger perspective, it doesn't really matter in the sense of, like, okay, I screwed up. It'll all come out in the wash at the end. It's fine. Don't take it too seriously, but take it just the right amount seriously so that we're trying to do our best. We're trying to handle things with love and skill, and that helps us take advantage of the opportunities of growth that we have.
What is death?
In most cases, when the body dies, the person's consciousness continues on much like it was before. The beginning of your time on the astral plane has been well reported. People report their loved ones coming to visit them, and then after a while, they will debrief with their guides. They'll do a life review. And then after that, we're back being full time on the astral plane, and there are a lot of things to do. It's a little bit like a retirement community where you can do whatever you want. You can golf, you can study, you can hang out with your friends, you can travel, you can do pretty much anything you want. And then after a while, the person starts to feel like they want to get back to work. They want to come back to the physical plane. And so then they might start planning their next lifetime, unless it's their last one. When we transition, our spirit guides try to make it as comfortable for us as possible. So people who believe in the pearly gates or something like that will have that sort of set up for them to experience so that they're comfortable, and then in time they can see the larger picture of what's really going on there. If a person had believed in existential nothingness, then they might be most comfortable experiencing a big blank void for a while until their guides pop out and say, "Surprise! Guess what? It's not a void," when they're ready to hear that. People who had a spiritual awareness, who understood that we are eternal beings and that it's just a transition, will probably have the easiest time. So they don't need a big charade put on for them to make them comfortable. They're just ready to meet their loved ones or whatever. Some people don't realize that they have died. Maybe they didn't feel ready, particularly in a car accident where you're killed suddenly. Then you might be in shock for a while. People who have had a really long and debilitating, draining illness may need to spend some time when they first cross over getting some healing work done to recharge. So it's different for everyone, but I think most people find from my experience in communicating with the other side that it's delightful. It's like, as the Michael entity put it, throwing off a shoe that was too tight at the end of a hard day's work. That it's just pretty great because you're not dealing with uh, a body that has all of its aches and pains and having to pay the bills and so forth. So I think for most people, unless they created some heavy karma, uh, find it to be quite wonderful.
Describe the life between lives.
Some of what I've heard about the astral plane afterlife makes me think of some Harry Potter types of magic where there are like libraries, but the documents are alive, and it's like even more than video, it's like 3D video where you can revisit just about anything that interests you that has ever happened. So you can study on your own, you can study with others in classes. And you don't have to study if you're not interested in studying, because there's just so much that you can do there. There are some rare souls who do a great deal of traveling, and they like to leave the astral plane of Earth and visit the astral plane of other planets, maybe far distant from this one, because when you're on the astral plane, the distance is very easy to navigate. And sometimes these are people who in life are also big travelers and adventurers. So they're really kind of the same when they're between lives. There's a lot of time to hang out with your loved ones. You basically can do whatever you want.
Are we judged or punished for our mistakes in the afterlife?
I think anyone who has a sense of what unconditional love really looks and feels like couldn't possibly believe in a judging or punishing God or anything, because that's not what love is. Love is compassionate, love is forgiving, love is not interested in making other people writhe and squirm and suffer. Love wants to help. And so, whatever mistakes that we've made, uh, we may punish ourselves for them, and we tend to do that plenty. But no one else is really very judgmental on the astral plane, certainly not the guides. They're just saying, okay, let's look at this. What do you think led to your choosing this path? What needs to heal so that you don't repeat that in the future? How might you want to make restitution for this? What did you learn from this experience? Because we really can learn from every experience. But no, there's no desire to punish. We punish ourselves because when we do negative things come back to us. And that's an opportunity for us to learn, but it's not because anyone is punishing us.
Is there such a thing as hell?
Everything is consciousness. Hell is consciousness. Heaven is consciousness. The universe is consciousness. So if you live in hell, it's because your consciousness is hell. And usually that's because you are putting yourself in hell because you have remorse, you have self judgment, self condemnation, shame, fear, and you're not willing to let it go. So the sensible thing would be would be to say, okay, what do I need to learn here? Learn it and then move on. But people who stay in that hell state, who are punishing themselves, are actually just holding on to their ego. They're not learning the lessons. The ego is what judges and condemns and makes our lives miserable. And this is a good way for the ego to stay in charge, to keep us in hell. And we think, oh, we're suffering and we deserve to suffer and we're paying penance. No, you're staying in your ego. If you want to open your soul and to unconditional love, then you forgive yourself and you let yourself out of hell.
Describe the life review.
The life review is simply a chance to look over the life that you lived and consider things. Maybe look at them from a different point of view. To ask yourself, what did I learn from this? What could I do better? If you think of the physical plane as school, and it is a school, school is not all that it is, but there is certainly a school aspect to being a human being, then it would be your end of semester review of, okay, what did I learn this semester? What do I still have to learn? Now, your guides will lovingly go over things with you, but let's say there's something that you as a soul are stubbornly refusing to see or take responsibility for. They can't force you. They can't force you to see your lessons. You may take 5 or 10 or 20 more lifetimes to figure out the flaws in your thinking that led to those experiences. But if you're willing and eager to see how you could have done better, there's a good opportunity to explore that. The more we can review our life while we're in the life, the better, because while we're still in the body, there's a chance to apologize to people or to make some amends here on the physical plane. But if we were just dense and didn't get the lessons while we're here, there is an opportunity in the life review to look at some things. And one of the techniques is that our guides can show us what it felt like from another person, what we did to them, how we treated them. Now, again, the soul isn't forced to get their lessons. So there are some that are still more stuck in ego who will say, well, it was their fault, or they had it coming, or just justifying it in whatever ways. So, and we tend to think of the of souls as being kind of all wise and all loving and all knowing and totally wonderful, but souls are evolving. Souls are not already in full understanding about love, truth, and beauty. They're still learning that. So some are more stuck in what we call false personality and in self-justification of protecting their being right about things, and they don't get the lessons, so they'll have to do it another time. In the life review, there is an opportunity to experience more vividly what your actions resulted in other people, whether you delighted them, maybe you healed someone with just smiling at them walking down the street, or maybe you were really kind of an asshole and you get to see what that was like for the other person. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will be, as a soul, wise enough to take that in and take responsibility for it and let go of defensiveness, but certainly there's an opportunity to do that.
What is karma?
Karma is inherent in energy. So, for example, if I take some energy that belongs to you, that energy wants to return to you. If I take your life, I owe you a life, not because someone else says that I owe you a life, but because the energy that I took wants to go back to that person. And so to repay that karmic debt, I either have to let you take my life or I have to save your life. But in some way, I owe you a life and I have to give it to you. Until I have returned to you what does not belong to me, I feel the burden of that pulling on me. It's rather like you have a fat rubber band tacked down and you pull on it and it just wants to bounce back. And that's how karma feels. It is a heavy, heavy burden, which is why we want to pay it back as quickly as possible. But if we have too much ego justification for what we did, if we say, no, we had it coming, or it's not my fault, or whatever, we can put off repaying that karma for many lifetimes. And as the karmic burdens build up on us, we can become more and more contracted, heavy, closed down. It can be a real problem for the soul. But every soul will form some karmic ribbons and will pay them back on the physical plane, not necessarily as egregious as murder, but whenever you do harm to another person, where you take something from them that didn't belong to you, maybe you stood in the way of their following their life path in some way. Let's say, someone was an up-and-coming young poor violinist and you stole their violin and they couldn't do their path anymore. You owe them and you're going to have to repay them. Now, this may sound like punishment, but it really is a great opportunity to learn, because when you repay the karma, you're on the other side of that. And just like in the life review, where you see what it's like for the other person, here you see what it's like for the other person on the physical plane. You know what it feels like, for example, to be murdered in cold blood. If you had done that and if you had no awareness of what that was really like, because some souls are really inexperienced. They just don't get it. They don't know that that's a really bad thing to do. So that's how they learn it.
Do we create our own realities?
You create your own reality is a core idea of spiritual teachings. It was first popularized through the channel Jane Roberts, who channeled Seth. In fact, it became so popular that it's now abbreviated as YCOR, you create your own reality, as a sort of a shorthand for people. Now, it should be understood that other people are also creating their reality, and sometimes that overlaps with you. So some of what happens in your life is because of the choices of other people, or just because of the hazards of the physical plane. It's just not an easy place to be. But in general, we create a reality in one of two ways. One is through the choices we make. And sometimes we make bad choices, but at the time we think they're good choices and there were unintended consequences. But in any case, we're making choices all the time, and those have results. The other way we create our own reality is just through our energy. Just if we're a loving, gracious, kind, open sort of person, we're going to tend to create more of that kind of life.
How do you define forgiveness?
Forgiveness isn't saying what you did that was clearly a violation is okay. It's not condoning bad behavior. It's saying, I have compassion for you. I understand why you did what you did. And I am choosing to be in unconditional love toward you and not carry around antagonism toward you. I may also decide that you are not a trustworthy person and I'm not going to have you in my life, and yet still feel love and generosity toward you. So to forgive is to let go in your own energy, and yet you still might make some boundaries. When we forgive, we free ourselves of carrying around the burden of animosity. You won't necessarily even say to the other person, I forgive you, but it will change your energy. And it may give the other person a chance to step out of their defensiveness, and maybe an apology would be coming from them, maybe it wouldn't. But the important thing is that you've freed yourself of blame and animosity, and because that's a burden for you. That's not really um, harming them as much as it's harming you. But I think when we raise our vibration by forgiving, we do create a space for healing for all concerned. And if somebody is open to healing, that could be helpful.
Discuss the idea of oneness/unity and how we can apply it in our everyday lives.
You're already one with them, there's nothing you can do about it. But you bring up a good point, which is even though we're all part of divinity, that our ultimate nature is love, obviously a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people have put their blinders on and are living out of a false version of themselves, and therefore they aren't very nice and they aren't that pleasant to be around. But we can still have that awareness that underneath it all, we are all connected. We're all in this together. We're all learning the same lessons ultimately. We all started out from the same place, which is the Tao, and we're returning to the same place, which is the Tao. And eventually, everyone's going to get there. Everyone is on a spiritual path. It's just a lot of people don't know it.
Where is heaven?
Heaven, like hell, is consciousness. Any moment that we have a consciousness of the eternal and the infinite, we're in heaven because energy is flowing and we're in that flow. On the other hand, it's easier to feel that when we're not in the physical body, which is why people often associate heaven with the astral plane, with the afterlife, because in the afterlife, we don't have all the aches and pains of our body. We don't have to earn a living. We're not stressed about paying the rent at the end of the month. So things are a lot easier. It's sort of like being let out to recess. And it's certainly easier to be in that sense of how great the universe is when we're on the astral. But if we can experience that here on the physical plane, that's an advanced skill. That's really puts us on the fast track to growth. It's sort of like the song New York, New York. If you can make it there, meaning the physical plane, you can make it anywhere.
Where is God?
I believe that God is the whole, and that we're all an indivisible part of, although the whole itself has a consciousness in addition to the consciousness of all the individual parts. And so I think ultimately God is our true identity. It's the reality of everything, and it's love. Love is the overriding reality of our universe. And when they say God is everywhere, that's also true because there's nothing outside of God. Of course, the people who are in a false consciousness who don't know that they are that may behave badly temporarily, but the bigger picture says, okay, eventually they'll figure it out.
Many believe we're shifting to a higher consciousness on this planet. Do you agree? And if so, can you describe this shift?
I do agree. The New Age movement is called that because for decades it's been predicted that we were moving into a new age of higher consciousness. Unfortunately, it's not quite as magical as people hope it will. It's not like the cosmos waves a magic wand and people suddenly become loving and evolve. People still have to do the work to grow. But there's a concept in the yogic traditions of moving from a lengthy period of darkness into one of more light. And the implication here is that we're moving into some sunnier cosmic weather where it's going to be easier to raised consciousness where there's not quite such a heavy pull of darkness. There's also a concept in the Michael teachings that we're moving from an average soul age among humanity that was more focused in outer material world things and now more focused in the inner world, emotions, and relationships. We call that the mature soul shift. So there's definitely something happening here. I think one of the evidences of it is if you're old enough to remember how things were 50s, 60s, 70s, all the things that people didn't talk about, didn't address, and then you started to see, like in the 1990s, people like Oprah Winfrey bringing up topics that had been swept under the rug, like sexual abuse and child abuse and trauma and alcoholism. These things are now being talked about. And more, there's a lot of things that used to be considered acceptable or not questioned, which no longer are. And even though sometimes that's taken to an extreme, I think this is a very positive movement, and it does suggest that we are moving into a higher consciousness. It will take time for people to make the adjustment to a higher consciousness. It's not going to be instantaneous, but we do see that it's already happening.
What are some practical applications of the idea that we're eternal spiritual beings?
For a lot of people, death is seen as the worst thing that could possibly happen. So if you actually know on a conscious level that we are eternal beings, your biggest problem has just been solved because you know, okay, yeah, I don't want my body to die, but at least I don't die. At least the soul doesn't die. So the big advantage of that is it puts things in perspective, and we're much less likely to take our problems as seriously as we have. I mean, they're still important. It's not to minimize pain or difficulties, but the perspective says, okay, I can handle it. It's not that big. Almost all bad behavior comes from fear of some kind. Fear is behind every nasty behavior. And the biggest fear is the fear of death because our bodies are hardwired to try to avoid dying prematurely. So if we can bring some perspective to that, where we say, oh, I don't have to be afraid of that anymore. I don't have to be so afraid of that anymore. And then that gives us the generosity, the room to be kind, to slow down a little bit, because we're not outracing death.
How do you define happiness?
Happiness is the free flow of energy on all levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And unhappiness is blocks in that energy. We accumulate a lot of blocks to happiness throughout our many lifetimes on the physical plane. And one of the great things on the spiritual path is dealing with them one at a time, where we get to see what our false beliefs are that are blocking our happiness and we can start to change them. That usually doesn't happen overnight, but we bring more awareness to what we believe and what we're acting upon, and we maybe do affirmations, we start to understand things better, and they start to dissolve. And as these blocks to our happiness, such as false beliefs, fall away, we start to feel better. Or what about old stored emotions like anger stored from the past that we never got a chance to release? We release those and we start to feel better, and there's more room for happiness to flow. Or if our energy field or the aura is filled with a lot of garbage from other people, maybe stuff from our family, if we can process that, if we can become aware of it and release that, we're going to be more happy. So this is not a quick fix. You know, there's not a quick secret to being happy. It's doing the work. Happiness is also a decision that we make in any given moment. So it's really helpful if I've processed a lot of my past trauma and my false beliefs, and I've been retraining my subconscious, but also in this moment, I can still my mind and tune into the eternal and let love radiate without concern for results. And in this moment, I could feel happiness. And if I keep processing all the baggage from the past, it's going to be easier to sustain that. Whereas a lot of people, they get to feeling really good from doing some good work. Maybe they went to a workshop, but they don't find they can sustain it. So the sustaining of happiness comes from doing the work, but it's also something that in any moment you remember to choose that, you can choose that.
What's the secret to remembering who we really are?
One of the secrets of that is stillness, of listening to our essence, of listening within. And I think another is being profoundly honest with ourselves. Because until we care about the truth more than defending our ego, we're going to be in a false state of consciousness. We're maintaining the ego. So that willingness to face everything with courage, sometimes it takes a great deal of courage, is a huge key to being on the path.
What does our soul want us to know?
Most of our fear is overblown and unnecessary. A lot of it comes from our survival instinct that's gone into overdrive. It can come from psychologically associating things with our fear of death that really don't belong there. So the more that we can objectively observe our fears and to release them when they are out of proportion, the happier we're going to be. So, dealing with fear is very important because it is the true opposite of love. It's what blocks love.
Is there a positive message or message of hope you'd like to leave us with?
I think this whole exploration is very hopeful. But one of the things that we can look at is that no matter what problems that we have, there are solutions. And it's possible to change our lives. It's possible to heal physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. It's possible to get from where we are to a better place if we're willing to do the work. There's so many more good tools for healing ourselves on all levels than there has ever been before. So seek and ye shall find. All we have to do is open to it.